Final Fantasy VII is a memorable game for a number of reasons that equal parts augmented and also reinvented the wheel on the format of the jrpg. Even looking at small, seemingly insignificant facets of the overall game, we can glimpse in these particulars the many interesting ways in which setting, story and gameplay were designed and built harmoniously together for a unique RPG experience. The Midgar Zolom is one such example, an ominous, optional boss planted shortly after the player enters the overworld. It left a marked impression on many players in the early game and became part of the legacy of Final Fantasy VII. Delving into precisely why this is, the Midgar Zolom proves an excellent case study in jrpg game design, blending obstacle with story and, most importantly, player agency. Firstly, looking at setting and gameplay structure, the Midgar Zolom is strategically placed between the dungeon-esque city of Midgar that we've recently escaped and spent the first part of the game playing through, and the wider overworld that we have recently been introduced to. It discreetly throttles the ability to roam free and confines us to the first section of the first continent, which contains and encourages us towards both the village of Kalm and Chocobo Bill's farm. The Midgar Zolom is then, in effect, the classic broken bridge concept in RPG design, an obstacle which confines us and keeps us on rails until a specific task has been completed. Rather than a literal broken bridge as seen in the earliest Final Fantasy game, or even other later titles such as Grand Theft Auto for example, the Midgar Zolom is in fact baked organically into the setting as a living, breathing threat that looms large between the player and progression onto the Mithril mines and the next stage of our adventure. The gameplay format of the Midgar Zolom as a potential rather than mandatory enemy, yet importantly also one that we can see as a live threat moving around in the lake on the overworld, is an interesting one. The fact that we can see it in the overworld, minding its own business until we try to cross the lake, the fact that we have the option to encounter it or not and engage it in battle, emphasises player agency within the world of Final Fantasy VII, and as futile as it might seem in giving the player the choice to either fight the Zolom or attempt to cross the lake on foot, it nonetheless offers an element of self-determinism that, much like the illusion of scope of the overworld itself, made Final Fantasy VII, and particularly at the time of its release in 1997, seem like a vast world of various player-determinate possibilities. There is a dynamic, almost minigame-esque aspect to this small, fleeting lake with a dangerous snake in it that speaks to what comes later and the decisions we're able to take there. Whether that is engaging with the Turks in battle in Gongaga or later when exploring the sunken submarine, all the way up to the infamous superboss of Emerald Weapon, which looms underwater in the late game and in its own way is not entirely dissimilar to the expectations that were set with the appearance and the encounter of the Midgar Zolom way back here in the early game. Beyond its functional purpose in nudging the player towards the micro-quest of capturing Chocobo, which opens us up to the first mode of overworld transport, it introduces us to Chocobo Bill and the mechanics of capturing and breeding Chocobos, which becomes an optional side quest later in the game. The Midgar Zolom is also crucial in its inclusion to story, specifically in how it builds the character of Sephiroth. Now, the story-specific scenario comes once we successfully cross over the lake to the Mithril mines, and here we cut to a scene where the camera tilts upward, showing the Midgar Zolom impaled on a broken tree. The creepy Trail of Blood soundtrack plays, lightning strikes in the distance, and Cloud ominously utters the immortal line, "Did Sephiroth do this?" So this works in tandem to and in continuity to the events at the Shinra Tower, where we have the Trail of Blood scenes, the dead President Shinra, who we find impaled with Sephiroth's Masamune. So this contemporary idea of Sephiroth is being built in his absence, and by his absence in these small snapshots that we see of him. The immensity of his strength is shown in the destruction that is left in his wake, with the mighty Midgar Zolom in this pre-rendered background being a great example of that, and particularly so if the player has encountered it and tried battling in it themselves at this stage, because they then know what a formidable creature it is, particularly in the early game. So for those players who were very invested in the story, more interested in story and character, this scene is a great moment that really moves the dial on our perception of the main antagonist that we are building towards in this game, and once again brilliantly builds him in his absence. Now, while being one of the most powerful scenes and background artworks in the game, the Sephiroth Zolom scenario also remains a slightly confusing and janky scenario for many players too, in how we have both just encountered the Zolom ourselves immediately preceding this event, and how we are also able to encounter it again after this Sephiroth event has taken place. Many forums and theories have attempted to explain away the plot hole with explanations that there is perhaps more than one Zolom and so on, but the factor that stands out most for me at least, the Zolom is something of a Chekhov's gun in the gameplay of Final Fantasy VII, which is to say that since we are shown it and since we are able to battle with it when we're attempting to cross the lake, we should at some point be able to defeat it. And I think denying the player the opportunity to do that in service of this Sephiroth scenario and in service of story, it may well have led to some discontentment with the game, much like the inability to control Sephiroth in the flashback scene without a cheat card at least, which did annoy a lot of players at the time. And yet at the same time, not showing Sephiroth having defeated it in the way he did, or outrightly showing or presuming that there is more than one Midgar Zolom in the world, that might have detracted from the overall impression of Sephiroth's character and the feat that he has achieved in killing it. And indeed, there is something about a singular, imposing creature, whether that's the T-Rex in the first Jurassic Park movie, or the shark in Jaws, or whatever, that it really focuses the attention and the threat when it's a singular thing. So for example, if Jaws or Jurassic Park featured 10 T-Rex or 10 sharks, the impact of the creature is diminished somewhat. And likewise, I think the player assumption that there is only one Midgar Zolom that was bested by Sephiroth is for this same specific reason too. So plot holes and jankiness aside, or indeed perhaps included, I think the Zolom remains an enduring cornerstone of Final Fantasy VII's design and legacy, a representation of the post-Midgar threat in the wider world, a superboss to aspire towards defeating, an obstacle to keep the player on rails, and a story device to build our impression of our ultimate villain. And indeed, even further than this, beyond the confines of the game, looking at the etymology for example, we could argue that the Midgar Zolom, as a corruption of the Norse myth-inspired name Midgardsormr or Midgard Serpent, it also represents this particular time and place of Final Fantasy games in their development, inspired as they always are by a range of myths and legends, but still, by the late 1990s, pocked by translation errors and little goofs like this, before they achieved the widespread acclaim and budgets, which were actually largely thanks to the success of Final Fantasy VII itself. So there we have it, a look at the significance of the Midgard Serpent, which first appeared in Final Fantasy VI as a summon, and it made later appearances in Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy XV and so on, and yet it firmly remains in the mind of the player in Final Fantasy VII, owing to its placement and particular impact in that game as a narrative device and as a gameplay feature. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider joining me on Patreon. Alternatively, if you feel like donating me a coffee, you can do so. The links are available below.